Hi, it's Ileana here, or otherwise known as Elle, at Awakening Cosmic Reality Show, and I have Jonny Enoch today with me. Welcome, Jonny.
Hi, Al. Thanks for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to see you here with us. Can you describe a little bit what you do and who you are?
Well, I am a clinical hypnotherapist, an esoteric researcher, and a writer. And I travel around the world looking at strange mysteries and that have to do with, ancient consciousness technologies, which I know we'll be talking about today. And I love looking at topics like extraterrestrials. Uh, when we look over at other ideas, I like looking at sometimes people's past life memories and looking at regressions that they may have had in a life between life protocols that were laid out by Dr. Michael Newton. And for me, much like yourself, I am just absolutely fascinated with the strange and mysterious universe that we live in.
And you're also you've studied ancient history, technologies, and the occult as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. As an esoteric researcher, I believe that when we go back and look at all of our ancient religions, and when we go look at all of our symbolism that is found in our mythology and going back into the ancient world, we're going to see that there are great patterns there that lead us to a greater understanding about who we are. And that in many ways, though, I think that we think we're so advanced today in our civilization, and we might know the answer to a million secrets, but perhaps we've lost touch with the one most important secret that has come down throughout the ages about who we are and the journey that we're on and how it attributes to our consciousness. So as far as I'm concerned, I think that it's one of the most fascinating areas to look into.
Yeah, that's when I was reading about what you do and who you are, that's the first thing that I saw on your website, the thought consciousness assisted technology, that you're researching that, and the esoterics and the occult mysticism and how that all ties in with going back to our historical origins, because you've done a lot of different trips to Egypt, right? And you're going back soon, so that's kind of ties in with what we're discussing today as well.
Absolutely, it does. And from my understanding of your work, Hel, from your own experiences and the research that you've done into all these many different areas, is that there's a tie-in there into all these sort of subjects and how they all fit. Because I believe consciousness really is the future of our science. I believe it's the future of where we need to look, and it's absolutely the missing puzzle piece. In fact, when we go back and we look at what Nikola Tesla said, he made this remark about how when science was to look at the non-physical sides of reality, that's when we would make leaps and bounds, essentially, at what we were looking at. So I think, again, it's all connected.
And for your talk today, would you like to start discussing the thought consciousness assisted technology?
Absolutely. Well, we could take this in all kinds of different places, El. We could take this into the idea of what the ancients knew, what they are capable of. I mean, we hear the terms thrown around a lot by friends of mine like Brian Forrester, who's been a pioneer in the area of megalithic research, but between him and many great researchers, they've coined terms like lost ancient technology or high technology, of looking at places like Egypt, for example. And just to give you an example, in Egypt, we oftentimes will look at the Great Pyramid and we'll say stuff like, okay, that was Khufu's pyramid, and we'll attribute it to a guy named Khufu. And Egyptology up till now has said that this was a tomb for a king named Khufu. Well, we don't even know if Khufu existed in the first place. And there's other tombs where someone with that name has sort of been discovered that they attribute it to, but it's a great misunderstanding because up until now, there's really been no bodies or sarcophagi that have contained a corpse that have been found in respect to the pyramids. So when we see the pyramid, especially on the Giza Plateau has been artificially leveled. And when you see the Great Pyramid, it's built like a Faraday cage, and it has these layers in it of like, sandstone, limestone, granite, and they're so precisely cut, and it's brought together like a technology. And not only is it like a technology, but if you go into between the king's chamber the Queen's Chamber and down into the subterranean chambers, we see that there is a connection under the Giza Plateau from the Osirian shafts. We see it down into underneath the temple, underneath the Sphinx, to the new area that they're excavating on another secret entrance to more hidden chambers on the other side of the Great Pyramid, that it had this other sort of access, like some have said, like Chris Dunn has said, it worked like a power plant. But at the same time, at the Great Pyramid, we have all these amazing stories that there was an aspect of consciousness attached to this. In fact, there's an empty box, which some call a sarcophagi, that is at the top of the king's chamber, that when people go up in there and they lay down in it, they feel very strange. And Elka, I don't know if you've ever heard this, or El, sorry, I always call you Elka, as is the name that I see come up. When we go and look at this particular box, it's amazing, because people often feel that they're having a transition of their consciousness, just being in this particular box and being up into that area. And we have a very famous story that we hear back from Napoleon, that Napoleon, at the end of the 18th century, he goes and he visits Egypt. And he did a lot of great things when he came there. They brought savants with them. They brought artists. They brought a great effort to document Egypt and to look at it in all sorts of amazing ways. But when he went in there, he actually came out white as a ghost, because he saw his Waterloo. He had an out-of-body experience. And that's not uncommon when you go and visit this thing. And the other incredible aspect of that is that when you visit the Great Pyramid, and for those people out there that are lucky enough to do that, when you go and visit it, your hotel key is demagnetized to these great areas like the Serapeum, or in the Great Pyramid, there's an electromagnetic kind of component or functionality of it. So some have theorized, that perhaps this had some sort of a type of a bio-interfacing sort of component to it, that when you lay down in this box, or you'd be in there, that perhaps it could have projected you out to an area where the stars are aligned with maybe Orion's belt, or that it had other functions as like an ancient power plant. But most certainly there are other areas in Egypt. There is an area that when we go over by Saqqara, there's an area called the Serapeum. And there's an incredible large boxes made of granite underground that I have a theory that these had sort of a regenerating capacity to them, that was there. But at the same time, we have an area there called the Sound Healing Hospital. Have you ever heard of this?
No, but I haven't heard of that, but I've done remote viewing of the Sphinx. And
Yes.
there's something under the Sphinx, but I'd like to hear first about the healing hospital.
Well, that's very interesting. I would like to hear your theories about the Sphinx as well, because very famously, Edgar Cayce predicted that under the Sphinx, where there's still an area we believe this could be, but under the Sphinx, there could be a hall of records that had an Atlantean hall of records, which is really fascinating. But when we go over to this area by Saqqara, we have this place called the Sound Healing Hospital. And by the way, the name Saqqara, Saqqara, that's where we get the name sacred. So this was a very sacred place, a very important place. It would have been near the ancient area that was known as Memphis, that was very important to the Egyptian people. And when we go over there, there's this place called the Sound Healing Hospital. And the building where we find this has the blocks were preserved by the dynastic people, the dynastic Egyptians, by putting beeswax on the side. So it's got a very interesting color to the side of the buildings there. And there are these platforms. There was 10 of these platforms. And the ground in these particular areas are layered with alabaster or travertine and calcite. And I know you're a crystals person from what I saw. So you're going to understand crystals, rocks, and gems, which is really fascinating. Well, on these sound healing platforms, you'd have somebody stand out on one of the platforms, and this would be like an MRI scan. So it would be like a sound technology. And this is just to show people just a little taste of how advanced these people were at utilizing crystals and stones and incorporating them into consciousness and working in this particular way in ways that we don't even begin to understand. They had the ability to have someone stand up on this platform, and you'd have a sender and a receiver box. So someone would go into a sender box and they would tone like a sound. Like, let's say you make the sacred Om sound, and the sound would create this vibratory resonance that would travel along the side of these channels up through the platform, resonate through your body, and then send it back out to the person in the receiver box. And when we've been there in these groups, you have someone that goes up there and they might have a pain in their leg or in their arm, or they might have a problem in their body where there's an energy imbalance or a blockage in the human body. And the sound resonance that travels up through there will travel to the other side, and the person that, unbeknownst to them, the other person in the receiver box, they will feel what's going on for that person's body. And that's just a little example of what I believe were these type of consciousness technologies. Now, before we leave this topic, El, I want to say that I believe prayer is a form of consciousness technology. I believe that in our religions, we've had these certain tenets and ideas that have been brought there into understanding our reality. Because if I was to ask you, by the way, Al, if I was to ask you, what is your definition of reality? What would you say?
My definition of reality, that there's multiple realities, that for me, for my life personally, there's the paranormal and the supernatural, and that's just part of my life because my life is high strangeness all the time. It never really stops because I've been an ET contactee, an ET abductee, a secret space program asset with the planetary corporations on Mars basis, on the moon, and beyond. I've had extraterrestrial lifetimes. I've been a shaman. I've been a mermaid. I've been a Wiccan practitioner in England in previous lifetime. So I've experienced a lot of it. So for me, what we're discussing right now is just part of normal life. It's people say, well, this is strange. This is different. I can't believe this is possible. And I always say to people, anything and everything is possible because you can manifest with your mind and your spirit energy and your soul from the ether to the physical, and from the physical back to the ether. That's thought consciousness assisted technology. Your mind and your soul energy is that technology because you are a living, breathing entity.
There you go. And, we might look at the idea with reality is that reality is different for every person. We are all processing reality differently. And some might argue is what more is reality than a series of neurological and physiological discharges that are moving up through the rods and cones in your eyes, through the optic nerve, up to the visual cortices and being processed in your mind. We're, looking at various, light spectrums and decoding what we might see, I guess, that we would say are sort of like strings, if you want to break this down with string theory. But our reality is, coming at us from many different directions and ways. And so I think that when we look at how, it's defined, there are certain universal laws. You mentioned paranormal, and some people will put what we call paranormal up there, and they'll classify this over with supernatural. And the idea with supernatural, saying something is supernatural, I believe that everyone that comes here and visits us, including our ETs, which you have had experience with as an ET contactee and someone with your sort of rich experiences that you've had as an understanding of these things, they all have to respect and abide by universal and natural laws. And so sort of like the idea that we look at with Star Trek, with the idea that I know you're very familiar with the Prime Directive, that they can't interfere with us because there's sort of these universal laws. So I think that everything that operates is not really supernatural. It is natural, even if we don't understand it. But perhaps the things we don't understand, we can classify them as preternatural. And that's really fascinating. Which brings me to another story about consciousness technology that we can talk about. Are you familiar with the work at all of Jordan Maxwell?
Through you, I am.
Well, that's good. He's a friend of mine. He's very old school. He's been around for a long time. I don't know if you've heard the stories before about the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull and crystal skulls. Have you heard much about them?
Yes, I have. And I have a few crystal skulls. I have an onyx one. He's called Alexander the Great. And he showed me the time of the Alexandria Library and stuff. I touch him, he activates and he speaks to me, and his name is Alexander.
That's very interesting. And that's the thing about crystals. Crystals can have different properties depending on how they're cut and their resonance. They hold energy, they move at various frequencies. When you see them with quartz crystal, you have that piezo or piezoelectrical energy that moves through it. They're used in computer chips. Recently, I had this other little crystal skull given to me. It's kind of a fun one that glows in the dark. But there's the story I heard from Jordan is a very interesting one, and it goes back over to southern France. And when you go into southern France, there is a very important castle there that is called the Rennes-le-Château, or the Chateau Lorraine, that was the Templar Knights' hideout. When the Templar Knights were being persecuted, they were hiding out there. And what's really interesting about that is that there was always this depiction with the Knights Templars of a human head, or the head of a man or a skull. So we even see that when the Templar Knights, later in their progression, when they progressed over to the Knights of Malta, and of course they later became the Pirates of the Caribbean. With that, when they were the Pirates of the Caribbean, they flew the Jolly Roger. And there's an idea that there might be a strange connection here to the crystal skull. And there's also another interesting connection that we might get to an extraterrestrial or ancient consciousness technology component of this. According to a friend of Jordan Maxwell's, he told me that his friend's name was Nick Nocerino, who became very famous for his work with crystal skulls. Nick Nocerino had the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull, had studied this and talked to indigenous knowledge keepers. He was out in France attending a Templar event, Templar kind of ritualistic aspect of that with an event, and they had a crystal skull there. And apparently this crystal skull had the capability for them to look at it, and it transmitted knowledge to them. It was like a communication device. So just picking it up and holding it, it was able to communicate with otherworldly beings. And what's interesting about this is that this fascinated Nick Nocerino so much that it changed the entire direction of his life. And so the conclusion that he came to is that this was the treasure that the Knights Templars were hiding and that they fled with. It was an extraterrestrial communication device in the form of a crystal skull. And this would potentially have given them the advantage that they had, according to his theory, to do the things that they did and make some very smart moves and know things ahead of time before they were coming. And this would have trickled down to various secret societies. So we've had rumors for many years, and there's even things I can't really discuss that I'm sure that you maybe have heard in the various programs and things that you've been involved with, that there have been certain technologies and ancient items that had the capabilities to hold information stored in crystals or to interface with people just by touching them or looking at them, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, for me, it's making crystal staffs and wands, because you can carry it with you wherever you go, basically in your hands, in your arms. Of course, the staff is big, so it's 6 foot. The way I was instructed to do it, again, I was given like blueprints in my mind, like visual blueprints how to do this. So the staff itself had to be 6 feet tall, the main base, the wood, right? And it had to have dragon designs on it. At the top, it has a crystal, and then it has different magical symbols on it. For me, it was Wiccan, the moon, the sun, and it had a huge crystal on top and a bunch of other crystals in the middle of it. And basically, you can change weather patterns with it. You can promote psychic communication with different animals, beings from outer space, ETs, aliens, however you want to call them, or even spirit guides, the etherics, as we call them, energy beings, right? Mm-hmm. These staffs can be done the Wiccan way. They can be done with feathers, with other stuff from the earth, the shamanic way. There's so many different ways to make this. And I studied both the Native American shamanism and the Wicca magic, light white magic. So I have combinations for the staffs of different things and for the wands and the talking sticks. So you can use these in various ways to influence nature and the world around you, as long as you do it positively and follow, well, for the magic, it's the Wiccan read. Do no harm, 3 times 3, that kind of stuff. And the Wiccan read has the natural laws of the universe. The shamanic one is more the natural nature laws of the universe. So respect nature, respect animals, respect everything, yourself and others, because what you do affects everybody else on the planet, not just yourself. So you have to do it in a very conscious, respectful way. Whether you work with your mind to manifest something, whether you work with staffs, wands, crystals, it's all energetic. Your mind has a connection with everything in nature because everything is living.
Yes. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when they discuss what we call Wicca today, and Wicca and all the entire movement of neo-paganism, and a lot of people hear the word pagan and they don't know where it comes from or they don't know how to relate it. According to the writer Albert Pike, who was also a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, very famous figure, General Albert Pike, he said that the word pagan came from the Pagani. And the Pagani just meant country folk, or those that, were serving a nature religion that saw manifestations of God in nature. But what we call Wicca today and neo-paganism, mostly that has been derived from, let's say, the traditions out of the British Isles, would have trickled down to them from an even more ancient form of their traditions that came, I would say, from the Persians and from the Aryan people, and including the cone-shaped hat that we associate with them, that was used for solar cycles and other sorts of ideas that we get there. But these traditions, including, when people are looking at the elements, or they are drawing a circle around them, that's another form of ancient consciousness technology. Have you ever noticed that when people are doing any kind of magic, I don't care what it is, they're getting into a ceremonial magic, they're doing a healing circle, they're doing a seance circle, they are working in the form of drawing energy up, or they're doing a ritual, they're drawing a circle around them. And why do we have crop circles? Why do we have fairy rings? It's because when we look at space-time, it can be bent, warped, and twisted. So when you work with this, you're drawing like a communication area. And it's just like now, if you were to ask Dr. Michio Kaku, the famous physicist, if you were going to ask him, how could we create, let's say, a wormhole to be able to travel into other universes in the multiverse, he would say, well, if you get a powerful enough laser, we can, basically tear a hole in the fabric of space-time and then inject nanobots into it and to be able to open it up and expand it to other areas. And I think that again is a good example of where we're looking at these multi-dimensional intelligences around us, and that there is perhaps an ancient telecommunication system here. Like when people are looking to contact some sort of entity or being, and they're drawing this circle and they're using these particular shapes of geometry and whatnot, this is a very good example of the consciousness technologies.
Yeah, and in the shamanism, it's the shamanic circle with rocks or crystals. You put the circle around you, or create it in a garden or something. And you can invite the spirit guides or the elementals in, and you can do it with the Wiccan magic the same way. It's called like the lesser banishing ritual.
Yes.
Or the higher banishing ritual, and you could tailor it to call in the 4 elements, the north, the south, the west, and the east. I call in the guardians of the east or the west. You invoke the guardians. That's with the Wiccan magic, or you invoke the spirit guides with the shamanism in these circles, and that's how you get the higher spiritual connection with other beings. Or, if you don't have any crystals around you or rocks or whatever, you just do it with your mind, and you have a good intention, you have a positive outcome, what it's going to look like, and you can just do it with your mind.
That's right. And what people have to realize too is when you look at this, we hear a lot of people talking about elementals and the elements. Well, actually, when we see this, that going back into the ancient Zoroastrians out of Persia, we find that within their story, which is very interesting, by the way, because we have the prophet, when we look over at Zarathustra, and he encounters Ahura Mazda, this man with a flying disc, which is in their story is the creator God coming down from the heavens. And by the way, again, this is why you see the Mazda logo on the back of the Mazda car. It kind of looks like the winged disc. Well, that's exactly what was happening there. In their teachings of Zoroastrianism, which have influenced us throughout the ages, coming down to Rome with Mithraism, that out of Constantine, we see definitely an amalgamation into Christianity, even of that. They have in their tenets very important ideas respecting the elements and the elementals. And so these things that we have today, they come back from thousands and thousands of years ago, that the ancient people have had this, and even out of Egypt. All this stuff that we see, working with candle magic and color healing and herbs and aromatherapy, all that stuff we find mentioned by the priests and put onto the ancient temples and the walls on the reliefs and hieroglyphics. So it's incredible that, people are still preserving these things and tapping into these sorts of energies.
Yeah, well, I did a banishing ritual because my ancestors had, they were burned out of their homes near Poland in the mountains in 1894, 1893, 1894. So I had to go into the past and see that, because I had to reconcile some of them. I had to do some healing, but I had to banish some of that negative energy from the ancestry line. So I lit candles, right? I lit a white candle in a holder, and I put shells around it in like this and like this, 4 shells as protection. So when I was banishing the negative energy and going back into the past at the same time, I was engaged in looking at the past and seeing the candles started dripping and following me. The candle residue, the wax, it was dripping and crawling and following me around. I'm like, oh boy, there's definitely energy here that needs to be released and healed and sorted out. So I did the banishing ritual. I said my words of prayer and release, right? And then the candle stopped. The candle wax stopped moving after me. It was hot and it was literally dripping and following me around the room, the meditation room. I'm like, well, this is real. There's energy here that needs to be released. The ancestral, frustration that they were burnt out of their houses, that magic was used against them. And I saw a black cobra literally like stand up and hiss at me. I'm like, I release you, I release you, I release you 3 times 3 because cobra is like, comes for change. In magic, it's like about change. It's about release. It's letting go of the enemies, whatever, was holding you back. The cobra signifies change. And if you don't release it, the cobra follows you around in your life. Even in your current lifetime, which was like the 2000s. So I released it all, the cobra disappeared, and the candle wax stopped moving me around on the floor.
So this is something you were seeing almost in a type of divination also, because when the wax was falling, you were seeing symbolically what it meant to you. And so I think that's the most incredible thing too. It's like people that might read tea leaves. I've heard that the wax that falls from candles, especially when people are doing any kind of candle magic or work with it, they've often always looked in that particular area. But again, I think it's very important to see all these things as a science. I very much believe religion should be treated like a science. I think that when we look at any of these sort of practices, they all have another component to it. And eventually our technology is going to catch up. And I do believe that we already have technologies that, we might not have for the public's sake, that might seem like magic at first, but we have technologies that are going to incorporate, aspects of our cerebral cortex, our thoughts, our ideas, record what we're seeing, be able to connect us in many different ways that are going to, very much become a part of these practices. So, it's kind of like what we might see as manifestation today, that, we often think about, hey, if you think about something like magic in theory and practice that Aleister Crowley talked about, if you think about something today and you think about it enough, you're going to manifest it. Well, in the future, we already start to see these replicators that you can replicate something or recreate it out of thin air instantaneously. So I don't think we're far off from that.
Yeah, the 3D printers, they could print body organs, body parts already. They've been experimenting on growing ears on mice and replicating skin and stuff, and for burn victims, 3D printing skin.
Yeah, but you know what? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much technology we get. I have a friend that always reminds me that at the end of the day, we are the most miraculous and incredible technology that there is. Inside of you right now, El, you have 100 trillion cells. And in each one of those cells, there's 100 trillion atoms. And in each one of those atoms, there's 100 trillion cells inside of that. So think about how incredible and remarkable the human body is and the capabilities that we have and can develop and evolve to with the right environment. And I believe that is the way that we're headed. And that's the greatest thing I want to say today, as you and I have been talking about these things. We've been talking about the ancient people. We've been talking about energy. We've been talking about thought. We've been talking about what we would call magical processes. At the end of the day, what does this all mean for us? Where is it all taking us? I believe by you sharing your story, by you putting out these videos, by us looking at these things, it's teaching us to grow and evolve. It's teaching us to ask more questions and to look at the universe is a great, mysterious, and wonderful, amazing machine that's here to evolve souls.
Exactly. And I think of myself as a living, breathing science experiment. I am the mad scientist. And I'm not afraid to experiment with magic, with different healing modalities. I've done the aromatherapy, the candle magic, different colors of candles for manifestation, the crystals. I've done all of that and a lot of other weird things I've tried, because I think it just adds to your toolkit. The more knowledge and experience you have, the more you understand yourself and what you're capable of manifesting, what the physical aspect is and what the soul energy is and how that connects together, and how that literally allows you can create a light body. You can literally create a light body with your soul energy. Your body may be sleeping, but your soul is traveling out there in the universe, communicating with extraterrestrials, with other human beings. Even remote viewing is like remote sensing. You can go outside yourself in time and space, to the past, to the present, and the future, and you can see scenarios with the remote sensing, remote viewing. That's you doing that. That's you going outside your body and expanding your thought consciousness technology, because you are the thought consciousness technology. You don't need Neuralink implants. You don't need microchips in your body to do this. You can do it yourself. You don't have to become a mechanical, partly mechanical being like a cyborg or transhumanism, because that's leading down the road of the mechanical aspects of thought consciousness assisted technology with technology. And we're going in, at least we're trying in a more organic way, with doing it with our mind and not with technology.
That's right. And that's what people have to look at. They have the capability to evolve these things within themselves. And that's what our ancestors had the capabilities of. And there's a very great story there. In fact, we see that they were so sensitive to this and that these sort of energies, they built all their ancient temples along these sort of ley lines with geomagnetic properties. And they understood something that in the ancient world they understood was this serpentine energy, that the universe had this serpentine energy that moved like this. They called it Fohat. And they believed that at the beginning of our universe, that when the ancient debris were moving around, that this energy was shaping and forming and moving planets together, even with a type of a friction and a change of what was happening and putting things together. And this process happens within us, and it's happening all around us. And they were able to tap into this. And this is very much even what we call 0-point energy. Tesla called it scalar energy. The Germans called this Vril. And when we look at this type of energy in the ancient world, we see that these temples that were built along these very specific places, such as the 33rd parallel and areas like we see with the Great Pyramid or Glastonbury Tor, Stonehenge, all these sort of areas that they were able to tap into energy there on the planet and use it in their temples, use it in their rites, and for healing and guidance or wherever we're going. And now we're using this energy, and as they've been using it for, even in the world of extraterrestrials and other programs, they've been using it to, take us off world. So it's an amazing universe that we live in. And I think that we can start to discover these things, not only by, watching shows like this and reading up on things, but we start to discover it right here when we go inside of our hearts and minds. That's the greatest discovery of the temple within.
And the soul is so multi-layered and multifaceted. In the secret space programs, what the planetary corporations would do, they can literally take your soul out of your body and transfer it into a clone, a cyborg, or a living, breathing avatar that's an exact replica of you. It's not a clone. It's the perfect replica of you, because what they do, they take they store your original DNA genome sequence on file, like the most pure aspect of you, before any sicknesses, before anything. Like, they take a copy of your genome when you were the most healthiest, and they keep that on file in the databases so they can replicate that anytime they want. It's always fresh DNA because it hasn't been tampered with, it hasn't been cloned or anything. So that is the original you. It's a perfect template of yourself, the best of you. And it takes longer to do than a clone because it has to be you exactly. It's an avatar of you that they put your soul into. So your soul can integrate with that avatar body perfectly, as if you are the physical, like, say, me, the physical me that's sleeping. That avatar on that other planet, like on Mars, on a base or something, that is the perfect image of you, template of yourself. It's not a clone, because it takes longer to build out that avatar than a clone body. So, and it has to be always from the original source of the genome. It cannot be taken from a replicated clone, the DNA, because that's impure DNA from a clone. It has to be your original genome. And they store multiple copies of that original genome on different planets, different databases. So they have backups of that original genome in databases, because it has to be taken from the pure source. It cannot be taken from a clone of you, because that's double dipping it. The clone is not going to function correctly, because that's not the perfect you, the perfect template of you.
Yeah, so I mean, it makes sense how the science would work, because when we look at consciousness is a non-local awareness. And, there's some great physicists that have actually talked about the science of how this works. Mainly when we see the science of how this works is that we would look at something called OR, which is the quantum consciousness theories that was brought out by Sir Roger Penrose, who's the famed British physicist. And of course, we have to look over at Professor Stuart Hameroff at the University of Arizona. He's from the anesthesiology department. And he's looked at your brain as having these things called microtubules that work like a micro girder system that are so well designed as computational devices that basically at the level of atoms and below, that there's this very small activity that goes on where it's almost like your brain works like a cockpit for consciousness. And consciousness is held together through something known as superpositioning or quantum cohesion. So through this superpositioning or quantum cohesion or a quantum entanglement, it can be held together because we know that matter, space, and time are all arranged in the tiniest of scales. So what's fascinating about this is that if you die, your consciousness can be held together or can come back in there to this sort of, quantum binding sort of system. So your consciousness can essentially have like its own barcode and its own way of locating it. And your brain right now, here's the really incredible thing, is that your brain is giving off these particular brainwave signals that are unique to you, that can be triangulated for you. And eventually, the technology that is already present, actually, China's already launching quantum satellites into the air. The technology that they will introduce on the nanoscale and otherwise will all work through quantum communication and using your body's own bioelectrical signals And so again, we are the most amazing technology. So it doesn't surprise me that what you're saying of the ability for them to, you know, take your consciousness and bring it into something that's very similar to you on that level, says it would be very, very close.
And they have a little trick while you're sleeping at night. That's when they do it. So your body is sleeping there in your bed. So if you have roommates or parents living with you, they come in, they see you sleeping. So they think you're still there. Your body's still there physically, but your soul energy, your complete consciousness that was in your body is out there somewhere else. And, for you, it might seem like an hour or two or 8 hours of sleep. Over there, up there, you've done 5 years or 10 years or 16 back in the time span of 8 hours, because there's the quantum dilation, time travel, leap streaming. They have that tech to do that to you, soup you up, and you've done a 16 back in less than 8 hours, or a couple of weeks. They retake you, and over a couple of years, you've done a 16 back. On Earth, it's a couple of years. They intermittently retake you, and that adds up to your 16 back, and you're put back into your body. Your soul is put back into your body. And it adds up into chunks of time to 16 back without needing to do age regression.
Yeah, I'm very sure that the ideas of time travel are very possible. And we get some ideas, even when we look at Einstein behind me, we see the ideas of the special theory of relativity, for example. And a good example for that is that we see the concept of time dilation. And you're talking about like quantum time dilation, is that if you're driving in a car and you're moving along, looking out the window of your car, or look out the window of a train, you're going to see, things moving at a much different pace, perhaps a slower pace if you're seeing the scenery on the side. To somebody that's standing out on the road, for example, that's not moving, they're going to see you just go, woof, you're flying by, right? So we have this idea of this time dilation, because traditionally we see like the idea that linear space-time goes straight. It's moving like time is like a river, is the old saying. And that, it would start to change depending on where we're stepping in that river. But there are all different kinds of ideas that we start to introduce when we move outside of the general theory of relativity and those sort of ideas of the larger aspects down into the quantum in the infinitesimal markings of things. And we start looking at how consciousness plays a giant component in this, and that there is a greater science unfolding there, which I think is fascinating.
And your mind can even influence time and space and time travel. I have the ability to speed up time whenever I want to get something fast. I think about it and I manifest, how can I flip the timelines here and there, speed up time, as long as it only affects me and nobody else around me, because I cannot influence others. So I have to keep that in mind, and I could speed up time and get what I need quickly. And then when I receive a phone call about something, what I need to do, or I'm like, I'm not surprised because time has been sped up. But other people tell me, well, I could feel it around me. Where did that time go? It flew by quickly. And I said, well, especially when it's my family, because they're the most influenced by this occurrence when I do it. They're like, that happened so quickly. Did you speed it up? Did you do this? And I would say, yes, I did. And they're not surprised by it because they feel that time sped up too quickly for them. It passed by. I was like, where did it go? Now, suddenly I've been told, for a medical test or something, it's going to take 6 months, and it only took 2 months to somebody suddenly canceled an appointment, and I got an appointment to get in for what I need. And my mom's like, wow, that's quick. You did it probably. You speeded up time. And I said, yes, I did. Because I need this now. I can't wait 6 months down the road for this to happen.
Yes, no, that's it. And time changes based on our perception of it. Sort of like Schrodinger's dictum, if you're paying attention to it, it seems to last longer. If you're not paying attention to it, it seems to go quicker. That seems to be the trick.
Or literally you manifest a time shift dilation and you alter a timeline where you literally with your mind, you picture getting results quicker to get in somewhere quicker. Instead of 6 months, it's now in 2 months because somebody has canceled their appointment for something, and you get in faster because it's not how you pictured it happening, but you did manifest with your mind and your energy to get a quicker appointment for something and to shift the time dilation matrix literally, because you are literally changing energy points and time matrices. So
I agree with that. Yeah, because every second we're shifting to billions of parallel universes based on our thoughts, the frequency we're holding on to, the energy that we have. I mean, energy follows thoughts, and thoughts become things. So I agree with what you're saying. Our perception of time changes also.
it's like keeping the mindfulness as above, so below, because what you put out in the etheric is what comes out in the physical, and what you put in the physical also goes into the etheric.
I agree with you. Now, Elle, I have to tell you, I will have to go, and we'll have to reconvene another time here. But, I just want to say thank you for today, having me on your show. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be here with you. And keep up the great work and educating people about all of these fascinating topics, because at the end of the day, anybody watching this, hopefully what they'll be inspired to do is to start asking questions about who they are, how does the universe work, what they're going to do with their life, and how they can use this knowledge and information to empower themselves.
And just quickly to go back to that Sphinx, we had a conversation yesterday where I mentioned that I had remote viewed these refraction telescopes that had rubies in them. And once this telescope is activated, it can uncloak other planets and bases. So you look at the telescope and you see the uncloaked, whatever it is on the other planet that is originally it's cloaked with technology, so you can't see it, but through these telescopes you can. And that's somewhere at the foot of the Sphinx. So you guys, because you're going to be doing Egypt tours soon enough, right? And you're going to be...
Yes, we have very exclusive access actually to go underneath the Sphinx and inside the temple and all these particular areas. So we have some permissions to do that. So I will keep an eye out for all of these things.
Because it is sort of like a thought consciousness assisted technology, because you have to interact with the red rubies and that are embedded in this refraction telescope. So it's quite interesting. It sort of relates to our conversation about the Sphinx.
That's incredible. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And I believe those sorts of things are all the way through there. Those were fascinating and incredible people that we're still learning something new about every day. And thank you so much, Elle. It's definitely been a fun chat.
And how can people contact you and see your research?
Yes, thank you so much for asking. Well, they can find me at www.metaphysicalsource.com, or you can go to ancientmysterytours.com if you'd like to learn more about the tours that we're doing to Egypt. We are also on Twitter. You can find me there as Jonny Enoch. That's Jonny Enoch, Enoch. You can find me on Instagram at Esoteric Johnny. I'm also on Facebook as Metaphysical Source. So I would love to hear from all of you and to hear your stories about ancient consciousness technologies and your theories, which is a lot of fun.
And you're also on YouTube. What's your YouTube channel?
You. I forgot about that. Thank you, Elle. It's the Metaphysical Source YouTube channel. And don't forget, everybody, if you're watching this video on YouTube or wherever you are, remember to like and show some love down below. Subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for more of Elle's incredible work.
Thank you, Jonny.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.